Hello, and I'd like to welcome everyone to this session on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and Human Rights Advocacy, Key Developments and Emerging Issues and Challenges from the Human Rights Council and the WHO, CRPD, and other treaty bodies, as well as structural issues. My name is Ruth Warwick, and I'm first vice chair of the International Disability Alliance. We will pause now for a moment to have more persons enter into the room. That will just take a few minutes. Okay, we can start again. So again, welcome to everyone. I am Ruth Warwick, and I'm pleased to chair this session on behalf of the International Disability Alliance, known as IDA. Going back to when the clauses of the CRPD were being drafted, the leaders of international organizations disabilities realized that we needed to unite together to influence the drafting process. And then once the CRPD was adopted in 2006, we realized that our work was just starting. We knew that we needed to advocate for the implementation of the CRPD and to monitor progress or lack of progress closely in the entire UN system. So we continued as the International Disability Alliance. All along, that there can be nothing about us without us, which means that people with disabilities must be partners in the process for change. It is not sufficient for us to be recipients
Good afternoon and good morning, everybody. I'm Juan Ignacio Pérez Bello from International Disability Alliance. It seems that our first vice chair had an issue with her connection. We will see if he can, we will wait just a little bit if she can reconnect. And let's see, let's just take a minute or two, please. Thank you. So for the sake of taking advantage of the time, we will move forward. This breakout session seeks to get an idea from the human rights mechanisms, mainly the CRPD committee and now the newly appointed special rapporteur on the rights of persons with disabilities, on the work that was undertaken in the last period, and also in the work ahead in this context, and of course in the case of the special rapporteur, the plan of work and the work coming along. Our two speakers are Mr. Danlami Basharu from Nigeria, current chair of the CRPD committee since a couple of years ago. The CRPD committee has been through a very difficult situation, of course, because of the pandemic and the need to suspend and cancel different sessions in this 2020. So we will be happy to hear from him on that experience and the challenges ahead and the plans ahead. And Mr. Gerard Quinn, newly appointed Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Emeritus Professor at the National University of Galway, and a very well-known professor for the international disability movement. Without just to limit the presentations to that and move forward quickly, I will like to pass the floor to Mr. Danlami Basharu from the chair of the CRPD committee for his initial presentation, noting that we will have the two presentations by the two speakers, and then we will open to a Q&A questions and answers session. We will appreciate that the chat box is used mainly for that Q&A session. So please do not comment that much on the chat box while the event develops, so we don't lose sight of the questions. And you can also, if needed, raise the hand in the participants option if you would like to intervene and elaborate a little bit more on the question. But the first option, the priority, please use the chat box for putting forward any questions after the two presentations. Mr. Danlami Basharu, if you would like, please take the floor for your presentation. Thank you very much.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is an international body created by the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, whose main function is to monitor the implementation by states parties of the rights of persons with disabilities enshrined in the Convention. In carrying out its mandate, the committee has already engaged in constructive dialogues with delegations from 95 states parties from all regions of the world, and has interacted with numerous organizations of persons with disabilities and other stakeholders whose contributions have been critical in advancing the Convention. Today, the Convention has 182 states parties that have ratified it, which is a welcome step in achieving full ratification. I'll talk about 4 main points. First, the impact of COVID-19 on the rights of persons with disabilities. The COVID-19 pandemic and measures to respond to it have shown that persons with disabilities have not been at the decision-making table. This has led to persons with disabilities being left at greater risk and overrepresented in COVID-19 infection rates and fatalities. The committee continued its mandate online, except constructive dialogues, and met virtually on 3 occasions. We continued valuable engagement with civil society representatives who brought to our attention the voices and concerns of persons with disabilities throughout this period. During our 23rd session in August/September this year, we were addressed by some organizations of persons with disabilities and civil society organizations, and we were delighted that they found the time to address us on different aspects of engagements with persons with disabilities and their different organizations. Secondly, suffice it to say that the committee is preparing a general comment on the right to work and employment for persons with disabilities with support from the International Labour Organization. Together, we will seek to ensure that all efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal 8, Target 8.5, are guided by the Convention. The committee will work intersessionally with a view to drafting an outline to post on its website, inviting all relevant stakeholders to provide inputs and potentially convening a day of general discussion in its next in-person session. Thirdly, as part of our mandate as the International Human Rights Monitoring Mechanism established in the Convention, the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities has discussed the issue of persons with disabilities in institutions and has set up a working group on deinstitutionalization. This group intends to engage with multiple relevant partners, including UN actors, civil society, NHRIs, who have the mandate of developing guidance on deinstitutionalization, and in particular, through the current COVID-19 pandemic. All provisions in the Convention relevant to the development of guidance, such as Articles 11, 12, 14, 19, 25, and 28, as as well as the committee's general comment number 5, 2017, on living independently and being included in the community, and the reports on 2 inquiries provide the framework for further development and would be the basis of this endeavor. Fourthly, in September of this year, the committee found that Spain had violated the right to inclusive education of a child with Down syndrome who was sent to a special education center by national authorities, despite his parents' objections. The committee further urged Spain to, among other recommendations, eliminate any educational segregation of students with disabilities in both special education schools and specialized units within mainstream schools, and to ensure that parents of students with disabilities are not prosecuted for claiming their children's right to inclusive education. This was made possible by one of the civil society organizations in Spain, and we do urge civil society organizations and organizations of persons with disabilities to continue to support us in bringing to our attention such abuses perpetrated against persons with disabilities. Finally, you do know that we welcome all participation in the opening written submissions as well as individual communications under the optional protocol. We do welcome interventions from organizations of persons with disabilities and civil society helping to publicize and monitor the convention's concluding observations in every way possible. Although we cannot confirm for certain of the modality of the committee's next session, suffice it to say that we are working on a range of options which include both online and in-person meetings, so that we can continue to carry out our work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your remarks, Mr. Bashira. And my apologies to everyone that my computer suddenly froze me out, which I've never had happen before, and it of course would happen in a session like this. But nonetheless, I'm very happy to hear that the CRPD committee is interested and committed to the inclusion of persons with disabilities and hearing our views. And of course, this is not new information, but it is good to have it reaffirmed. We will move on next with Mr. Gerard Quinn, who I very much welcome to his new position as Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. He was appointed by the Human Rights Council just 2 months ago and is already hitting the ground running. I turn it over to you, Mr. Quinn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a great honor and privilege to be with you today, especially to be on the same panel as Dan Lamy, who's doing such tremendous work as the chair of the UN CRPD committee. Yes, it's been 2 months, but it feels like it's been 2 million years. A lot has been happening. Some ideas are crystallizing, and I just want to share with you what they are. As you know, the role of the Special Rapporteur is to shine a light on some thematic issues that hopefully will unblock some blockages or maybe act as an early warning system to other issues coming around the corner. Also, the Special Rapporteur conducts country visits, and maybe I won't say much about that now, but if anybody wants to ask a question, I'm more than willing to answer. And then the third part has to do with petitions that are largely confidential. And let me just assure you that they are rolling in already from all parts of the world. So maybe I'll just focus on the thematic work going forward. And the timeline here is a 3 to 6 year timeline. Not everything will be done immediately, certainly not in the first year. And I've 3 tranches of work that I'm interested in pursuing. The first has to do with ensuring the disability perspective, particularly the perspective of the CRPD, is adequately reflected in how the world responds to some existential threats to humanity. And they're pretty obvious. Obviously, COVID is one of them. May I, in passing, commend highly the work of the Disability Rights Monitor, which was published only last month, which is a fantastic resource on COVID. And I'm still reflecting on that and slicing and dicing what issue I might look at with profit. And perhaps I will look at the future and going forward, and particularly what a resilient and inclusive recovery would look like. Climate change is another grand existential threat facing humanity. I'm very minded to do something not on every aspect of climate change, but only on the responsiveness so far, question mark, of national adaptation planning to persons with disabilities and their rights and their needs. I'm also very mindful of the Security Council resolution last year on armed conflict and disability, and want to find a way of continuing the dialogue both at the Security Council, but also in the Human Rights Council on that particular issue. And last but not least, I'm very concerned about the persistence of extreme poverty on the basis of disability, as well as other intersecting identities. And I think we need fresh approaches to this because the efforts so far haven't really worked. So there's some of the grand existential threats, and the task really is to ensure that the disability perspective is more than adequately absorbed and dealt with. I have a middle tier of work that for the moment I'm just calling hidden intersectionalities. It's actually not all that hidden to us, but it's hidden to a lot of people. And quite obviously, I want to continue the work of Kata Devandas on the rights of older persons with disabilities. We had a splendid side panel yesterday on exactly that issue. There was a very useful meeting of minds between ourselves and the new special advisor on the rights of older people. So I think the time is right to be focusing on the issue. Of particular interest to me is the future of long-term care and whether it could possibly have any institutional future. I hope so, but that awaits to be seen. I'm also very interested in Indigenous people with disabilities. We skirted around the topic during the negotiations of the convention, but I think it warrants closer scrutiny, not least because it gets us to think about cultural sensitivity and the application of the UN CRPD. Possibly interested in prisoners with disabilities and some of the real well-known problems that attend prisoners with disabilities in every corner of the world. And of course, I'm a keen student of the work of Women's Enabled International on gender and disability, and want to find ways to continue that work as the UNSR. I'm very taken with its thesis about the hidden pandemic of domestic violence against women and girls with disabilities. And I'm taking further advice on what we can do on those issues. So the first tier has to do with the grand existential threats, the multilateral action, and the need to take disability fully into account. A second layer might have to do with intersectionalities. And by the way, I'm not really primarily interested in how the groups relate to one another. I'm primarily interested in how doing the intersectional work reveals some common challenges across identities and across grounds, and might point the way to more life course and more durable policy solutions into the future. The last tranche has to do with issues or topics or rights or institutional environments that so far have not received very much attention. I'm very mindful of the World Bank report this summer that pointed to the ease with which even very tiny services could be kicked away for people with disabilities, particularly living in rural settings and remote settings. And the World Bank plea is a plea for continuity of services and resilience of services into the future. That to me is the ecosystem for disability. There's a lot happening there. There's a lot of innovation, but we haven't joined the dots, particularly the trends toward the personalization of services, the trends toward, for example, non-coercive services for people with mental illness and so forth. And I think we need to pool our heads and think about innovation in transforming the service environment, and particularly to think about resource-poor countries and how services can be imagined and built up from the beginning, so to speak. I'm also mindful that the right to culture, to participate in culture, to be part of the ecosystem for the generation of culture and its connection to democratization more generally hasn't really received some of the attention that it might receive. I also want to look forward, and I'm consulting with a few colleagues on the implications, good, bad, and ugly, for artificial intelligence for people with disabilities around the corner. This won't be an immediate priority, but it's something that I'm keeping on the back burner as something we got to keep an eye on and maybe do some preventive action before it's too late. And last but not least, and this was something that cropped up during the negotiations, but then got dropped because obviously there were other priorities. But there was a proposal to focus on the contribution of regional organizations, regional arrangements, regional groupings of states. It did not make it into the text of the convention, but no matter, that doesn't preclude us shining a light on the force magnifier of regional organizations, African Union, Organization of American States, but also informal groupings like the British Commonwealth, the Group Francophonie, the new Ibero-American Network and so forth. And I think there's a lot they can learn from each other. There's a lot of critical success factors they could identify from each other's experiences, and a lot they can share with each other to try and make sure that the convention really reaches small places where it matters most in their own regions, where they have the expert knowledge. That's a tall order. I'm not saying that everything will be done, and I'm not saying it will be done in the order that I put it forward, but for the moment, that constitutes my thinking, and I'd love to have your feedback and input. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Quinn. We are very interested in your perspective and appreciate your having laid out what your priorities are and where you think you'll be headed in your work as a special rapporteur. Intersectionality is a particular theme that I have a great interest in from my background dealing with gender and race and ethnicity and other issues. And I believe that this is a way forward in terms of thinking about this concept even more than we have in the past, among many of the other good points that you've made. And we now will have an opportunity to open the floor to our participants for their questions and comments. We do ask that you put them in the chat room, and we will pose several at once to Mr. Quinn and Mr. Bashura. If you are not able to put them in the chat room, do let us know by going into the participant and there is a feature in there to raise your hand. So we do have a few questions and we'll start with those questions at this time. There's one question for both panelists on how can we partner so as to facilitate the sharing of information related to persons with disabilities in the country of Cameroon. And then there's a specific question addressed to Mr. Bajrou. It is, can you give us some more details on the deinstitutionalization working group, its timelines, objectives, and how it can meet these targets, and is there a way for DPO to join this working group? And we have one more general question that has just popped up, and it is a bit long. CRPD had a very positive impact in European countries. Almost all have ratified the convention. However, we're concerned about the development in the jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights in various areas, including criminal law and work of the Council of Europe violating the CRPD. In particular, the draft additional protocol to the Oviedo Convention that will allow involuntary treatment and placement in psychiatry. There seems to be a lack of political willingness to comply with the CRPD. Here's the question. Do you have any recommendations on what can be done to ensure these bodies comply with the CRPD? How can we ensure that courts, especially regional courts, use the CRPD in their jurisprudence or at least comply with it? I will turn these questions over to the panelists and you can indicate to me which one of you would start. And just as a backup, in case I have more computer problems, my colleague Juan will step in, and I thank him in advance for having done so already. Did you want to start off, Mr. Bashir? How about while we're seeing what there might be a connectivity problem there, maybe Mr. Quinn, you could go ahead.
Thanks, Ruth. Let me address the third question, which is specifically to do with the European context. Let me say that privately and publicly, I have objected to the drafting of the protocol to the Oviedo Convention right from the beginning. Just to make sure you know what this is, it's the very old model of mental health based on coercive measures. And the intent behind the draft protocol, as I see it, is simply to refine and update a very old model. As you may know, the Council of Europe has very, very few resources. I would certainly argue, both publicly and privately, and have, that its resources would be much better spent in actually building up a completely new model in the mental health field based on non-coercive measures. I do agree, I'm not sure it was part of the same question, that the way regional courts internalize the CRPD and use it to transform its jurisprudence, that should be part of the regional convening that we hear, hopefully between Organization of American States, the Inter-American Court, and the European Court. Probably the Inter-American Court can share a lot of positive lessons with the European Court of Human Rights. Let me just say that the ledger is not completely negative with respect to the Economic, Social and Cultural Rights Treaty of the Council of Europe. They have very advanced jurisprudence, particularly on the right of people with disabilities to make their own decisions and to live independently. So it's a mixed bag in the Council of Europe, but certainly I would agree the Oviedo Protocol is unwelcome.
Thank you. Let me see if we have Mr. Bashura available to comment.
Yeah. Hello. Can you hear me now?
Please.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I was talking about the deinstitutionalization process, which we have begun in the CRPD. Because if you remember earlier this year, we had a webinar with Validity and DRI and a few other organizations to talk about emergency deinstitutionalization. And we thought we should do something about it in the CRPD. So we got together a group to work on deinstitutionalization. And this group, of course, will liaise with all relevant stakeholders, civil society organizations, and what have you, so that we can together be able to come up with what we think organizations should do and governments should do in order to ensure that the deinstitutionalization process is really put into force. Of course, we do not want to see children in institutions, and so that is one of the driving force behind this deinstitutionalization process. And of course, we welcome every other civil society organization that can help to join us, so that together we can form a very formidable group in calling states parties to attend to the issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will go to another set of questions. We have quite a few. May I please hear your opinion on this? The UN is a partner in legal CRPD cases, and as such, the UN monitors these cases. But this person is indicating a need for support. Another, and so there's not really a question there, more of a personal plea. The next one to both panelists is, when talking about climate change, I'm wondering, beyond the focus on adaptation, which sometimes feels like a resignation to climate change, how can the UN CRPD, with its obligations towards states, be used to respect rights, in particular social and economic rights? What is the role of progressive realization to stop the world from further warming? We will go to a few more questions so that we can get as many in as possible. Can we publicize the best practice like HRC viewing inclusive education in New Brunswick, Canada as one of the best in the world? I'm from Canada, so that's why I smiled. And then another question is on the issue of intersectionality. The person would like to know more about what are the concrete steps that are currently being taken, and what can civil societies do to support advancing the intersections between the reporting and monitoring of the CRPD on issues related to children with disabilities, and in particular, how the CRPD committee will be involved in the committee on, just lost that thread there for a minute. It's to do with the committee on children. Is there a process in place to allow for children, youth, and parents' involvement? So I think we'll stop there right at the moment and turn it over to our two panelists. Could I have Gerald, would you go first again?
Yes, no problem. I do agree that the slice on climate change that I put forward is a narrow one. I certainly don't see it as internalizing the inevitability of climate change. I see it more in terms of a test case for how Article 4.3 of the Convention can be put in practice. That is to say, active consultation, meaningful consultation in national plans to try and change and adapt. And I must say it's going fairly well in some countries, but not at all in others. And so a light needs to be shone on that. With respect to intersectionality, it's a really good question. I take the question to mean, is the CRC process already open to disability perspectives? I believe it is, but maybe Dan Lamy would be better able to answer that, because the committees, the various treaty monitoring bodies, do meet fairly frequently and exchange their own perspectives. I think personally, one of the big issues with respect to children with disabilities is institutionalization and the deinstitutionalization agenda. It seems to me it's not yet been adequately addressed under international law, but over to you, Dan Lamy.
Hello? Hello?
Have the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yes, the issue of children with disabilities hangs very high on our agenda. And if you may know that the UNICEF is supporting a joint statement between the CRPD and the CRC, so that we can come up with a joint statement to disseminate to civil society and to governments on issues of children, including children with disabilities. We have gone very far. We've done about 5 or 6 sessions just to try and ensure that our stands are the same. But of course, we still have a small bit of way to go to make the statement completely workable between us and the CRC. Of course, one of the main issues, like Gerard said, is the issue of institutionalization or deinstitutionalization. Of course, the stance of the CRPD, CRPD has a very high standard on the issue of deinstitutionalization of children with disabilities. It does not want to see children in institutions in any way whatsoever. So that is what we are really working on, and we hope next year to meet again, so that hopefully we'll be able to come up with some joint agreement or joint working group statement between the CRPD and the CRC.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have time just for one more round. And these 3 questions are actually directed to Mr. Quinn. So I will read them. It was interesting to hear about the interest on prisoners with disabilities. Do you have any clarity on how your plans look like to approach the issue of deprivation of liberty of persons with psychosocial disabilities stemming from the criminal justice system? It's clearly a difficult issue in terms of criminal law, but also a very highly controversial one in terms of public opinion. And then from another participant, regarding prisoners with disabilities, how do you see the role of restorative transformative justice along with forms of crisis support that are free from any coercion and are based in, or at least include, non-medical forms of support based in simple human solidarity? the person says, I'm very much interested in the linkage of restorative transformative justice movement, including for police abolition and community alternatives to policing, and our work from a CRPD perspective to replace involuntary hospitalization and treatment with meaningful alternatives. And another second question from the same person is, can you say more about long-term care in relation to older persons with disabilities? There seems to be a general reluctance to apply CRPD Article 19 fully to older persons. And then finally, we will close with a comment, not a question, but greetings from Sylvia Kwan to all panelists, and taking the opportunity to congratulate you, Mr. Quinn, on your appointment, and wish to pose a remark on reference to violence against women as a hidden pandemic, and is opposed to referring to violence against women as a pandemic or social individual illness. And it is certainly not. Violent persons, mostly men, who exercise violence against women are seen. So I think seen as ill or sick under these premises, and violence against women is part of society, and it's a mechanism to keep male control over women. In order to end violence against women, including women with disabilities, structural changes need to be put in place. So I turn it over to you, Mr. Quinn, since most of those questions and comments were directed to you.
Thank you, Ruth. I'll be very brief. Let me begin with the long-term care issue first. I think it's really, really interesting that if you unpack the term long-term care, it usually means issues with respect to daily activities, or what's called instrumental daily activities, like cook a meal for yourself and so forth. And the consensus up to recently, I would say in the last 10 years, is that if there are difficulties with respect to activities of daily living, then residential options are the only options. That's been changing, both for older people as well as for persons with disabilities. If you look at the last White House Summit on the Rights of Older People about 7 years ago, the consensus was that long-term care, if it means anything in the future, has to mean investment in the community. Similarly, a European Social Protection Committee has decided exactly the same thing 2 years ago. So I think there's an interesting shift happening out there that creates space for a completely different policy imagination for older people along the lines of Article 19 of the UN CRPD. And also, of course, the pandemic has showed in graphic detail the public health dangers of residential institutions, not just for people with disabilities, but also for older people. So I think the ground is shifting in very interesting ways. And if we come around to drafting the Treaty on the Rights of Older People, I would certainly expect to see some equivalent to Article 19 in it. With respect to prisoners, let me just say it's very early days. We're just opening up the field. We're looking at all issues, and the issues that have been flagged in the questions, we will certainly take them as cues and dig deeper into them. It's not a project will begin immediately, so it's very, very open to interaction with people after the seminar as to the shape they think we should put on it. And let me agree with Sylvia. I was using the language that was put forward in recent reports rather loosely and under advisement. Of course, you were right. It's incredibly important, and it's not, it cannot be captured in a glib label like the one that's been in the recent reports, and my sin is simply repeating those labels. And I confess to that sin, and I will take on board everything you say, Sylvia. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Quinn. I would like to ask Mr. Bashura, would you like to make any last comments since we are at the close of this seminar, including whether you want to comment on any of the previous questions? We will give the floor over to you. And could you unmute your mic? Great.
Yeah, thank you. I was saying that I'd like to say something about older persons with disabilities and Article 19 of the CRPD, living independently and being included in the community. I think the article applies to everyone, both older persons and young persons. And it's remarkable to note that the African Union also has a protocol on older persons, because Africans do respect age a lot, and so Article 19 is applicable to all persons, both older persons, young persons, and so on. And yes, violence against women obviously is perpetrated mainly by men. So we need to get our men to understand the issues of violence against women, particularly women with disabilities. These are very important issues that our committee has been taking on and will continue to take on board. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are at the close of our session now, and I believe we did address all of the questions that were posed, and the questions and answers are ongoing. This is just the continuation of our dialogue and discussion, particularly given the newness of Mr. Quinn to his role, and the also relative newness of Mr. Bashir to his role. And I appreciate both being very open to us in this session, and that bodes well to being open to our comments and interventions in the months ahead. It will be important to all of us who are participating in this seminar to put forth our views, and collectively we will come up with what we think is the way forward. And it's always a moving target, because circumstances change, approaches change, but at the core of it is the dignity and right of the person with the disability. And that, I think, unites us very strongly. I would like to, before closing, thank our interpreters and our captionists, and to thank the staff of the International Disability Alliance, without which the seminar was not possible. And thank you to the internet for not crashing again on me. Have a good rest of the day, and thank you for your participation. Thank you to our two speakers, and thank you to all of our participants.
Thank you, bye. Bye.
We officially close the session.